or valid, or inductively forceful or cogent, right? So broadly speaking, so we had started the discussion on fallacies, so that we can understand what is wrong with the argument. So there's a broad canvas of fallacies in arguments, and we most thinkers, they divide the vast categories of fallacies into two basic types. One is the formal fallacies and informal fallacies. So in the formal fallacies are logical fallacies. So arguments which are very logical in nature, you can see whether they have any logical defect or not. So whether they are sound, or whether they are cogent or not, and is there any problem with the structure of the argument or not. So when there is a problem in the structure of the argument, then we say that there is a logical fallacy, right? It's a formal fallacy. So formal fallacies, they have problems in the structure. So you can make out from the structure, you can take a paragraph, you can put them into premises and conclusion, and then you can see whether the structure is okay or not. So if there's a problem with the structure, then you can quickly say. So logical fallacies are easy to decipher. All right. And then you have yes, anybody wants to come in? Okay. Then we have the rest of the fallacies, which are more popular. Those fallacies, they are called informal fallacies, right? So on the last turn, we tried to look at the formal fallacies, and within that we looked at 4 kinds of formal fallacies, and then we had also started the discussion on informal fallacies. So there's a huge list of informal fallacies, and then today we'll also discuss the fallacy because of the wrong technique being used. There may be the content wise, it may be good, it may be structure wise, it may be valid, but then sometimes people use psychological techniques which may not be which may not be right for a good argument. So what are those faulty techniques that makes an argument weak, right? So we will try and cover all the broad spectrum of different kinds of fallacies today. So brace yourself for a more perhaps lengthier session. I've tried to do away with the intermittent quiz because I know it will be too long otherwise. So let me share the screen and then look at, we'll have a quick recap of the session that we had covered, the topics that we had covered on the last turn. Can you see the screen?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so as I just said, formal fallacies, they are traceable to the very structure or the form of argument, and informal fallacies, they are mostly related to the content of the argument. Then these are the 4 types of formal fallacies. So the first 2 types typically pertain to the logical, conditional statements. So if the premises are conditional in nature, so or then we apply these 2 fallacies, and then the fallacy of deriving odd from base and base. So I'll just quickly sort of revise for the sake of those who had some confusion last year, or maybe those who missed the last session. So the formal conditional fallacies, there were 2. So what were those 2? Denying the affirming the consequent and denying the antecedent. So in philosophy, and a valid argument has the structure: if P then Q, P therefore Q, right? Now if there is a problem here in the structure, then it becomes an invalid argument, right? So for example, P is the antecedent, Q is the consequent. For example, in this is a conditional premise. As I said, these apply to conditional premises. So the premise here is if it's a cat, then it's an animal. So what is the antecedent here? Here antecedent is referred to as P. In my slide, you would find it as A, right? So antecedent is that if it's a cat, and the statement after then, it's an animal. So then it's an animal is the consequent, and if it's a cat is the P. Now, if the premise is a conditional, and in that conditional premise, if you affirm P, then the argument is valid. The argument is good. There's no fallacy here, right? So this is the right kind of the structure of this conditional fallacy, conditional argument. But then if you affirm Q instead of P, then it becomes a defect. Then there is a defect in the argument, and that is why we call is that we call the defect as affirming the consequent fallacy. That instead of affirming P or instead of affirming antecedent, you are affirming Q here. So if you look at the same example here, like for example, if it's a cat, then it's an animal. Fido is an animal, so Fido is a cat. No, Fido is a cat, therefore Fido is an animal. It's okay. But then Fido is an animal and Fido is a cat. All animals are not cat, right? So apparently also logically you will find that there is a flaw, but then the structure also gives you an instant idea about the flawed nature of the argument, right? So this was the first fallacy pertaining to conditional arguments, that is denying the affirming the consequent, right? So instead of affirming P, here you are affirming Q, right? Then the next conditional fallacy formal in the form under the formal category was the denying the antecedent. That was affirming the consequent. This is denying the antecedent. So in philosophy, we call it as modus tollens. The modus tollens means that this is the right structure of the logical argument. That is, if P, then Q, not Q, therefore not P. So if we look at the same example, if it's a cat, then it's an animal. So this is the conditional premise. That means either of the two fallacies will apply. Now you look at what is happening here. Here there is the conclusion. The next premise is if it's not an animal. So the next premise, the first premise is the conditional premise. The next premise is that it is denying the consequent. If you are denying the consequent, it's a valid argument. So not Q, not P. But if you reverse the structure, if you deny antecedent, you deny the first part, the P part, and then you say and then you accept the conclusion as not Q, then this becomes a defect in the argument, and we call it as denying the antecedent logical fallacy or formal fallacy. So I've just tried to put in in a more understandable manner with the examples here. So those of you who had confusion in the last session and those who missed can go through this slide and understand better. Any confusion with any one of you so far? Shall we proceed? So these two formal fallacies are clear to everybody, which pertains to typical structure of the conditional premises. So any premise which has conditions in it, which starts with if, these two fallacies will may be applicable. Then the third logical fallacy is that you derive prescriptive conclusions from descriptive premises. So we've already seen the examples here. Then we also looked at another logical fallacy wherein the arguer is using stereotypes or biases to make a point, right? So We discussed this on the last one. Then again, we started with a discussion on informal fallacies. In informal fallacies, like we tried to cover 5 of them. I think appeal to authority we missed. We didn't cover, so I'll cover today. So the first was the fallacy of majority belief. So as you would recall that informal fallacies, they don't have any obvious problems in the structure, right? The problem is largely in the content of the arguments, right? So in fallacy of majority belief, the problem is that since the arguer is trying to make a point resorting to majority's belief. So since majority people believe this, then the government should do this. So this kind of a reasoning is a faulty reasoning in terms of content, and that is why it is a fallacy, and we call it as the fallacy of majority belief. Then we also looked at fallacy of common practice, where here the arguer is resorting to what? Justifying that everyone does it. Everybody comes late, so I will come late. Everybody joins late, so I will come late. So or anybody cheats, so it's okay to cheat. So these kinds of arguments to justify something just because on the pretext that everybody does it, again is a fallacy in the argument, and it is called fallacy of common practice. All right. So then we also looked at the gambler's fallacy, or Monte Carlo fallacy, because it is based on the belief that if something has happened more frequently than normal in a given period, then it is going to happen less frequently. So we saw the example of how people think that they might not have won a lottery ticket in the past, but most probably they're going to win again, and that is why they keep buying tickets, right? Similarly, this fallacy is also applied in context where in childbirth, when people, they expect a male child to be born. So after first, second, third, fourth child, they keep waiting, and they expect that okay, the next child will be a girl child or a boy child, whatever they want. So they keep justifying on that pretext. So and that kind of a justification again is a faulty because this is a misunderstanding of the factors that affect the probability of an event occurring. So that is why we call it as a gambler's fallacy. Then we have another very common fallacy, which is called ad hominem fallacy. But most of these fallacies, like, they have emerged in the historical times, and the philosophers, they usually hailed from from the past, and the names you can find it in Latin. So ad hominem basically means to the man, right? So to the man, in the sense that this fallacy occurs when you're responding to an argument by making an personal attack on the person. So sometimes when you're not able to give a logical answer to an argument, then a counter argument, to win an argument, you start attacking, making personal attacks. So personal attacks could be verbal, or but the moment you start you start becoming physical, then it's no more an argument. So we are not using that. So often you would have come across you might have experienced arguing with your elders, siblings, and then if you're not able to counter argue properly, and then you start being physical. So but otherwise, like, you can people start calling names, and they start making personal attacks. So that kind of a fallacy is known as ad hominem fallacy. So yesterday we discussed we discussed the example of how people give nicknames, Pappu, or whatever, different kinds of in political debates. Then yeah, so sometimes ad hominem, you may not attack person's character as such, but you may attack a person's intention by citing the circumstance in which the person is, right? So yesterday this was a food for thought for some of you. I told you that how Anthony Fauci had been a controversial figure in the entire 2020, because of his stakes in the pharma sector, and the fact when he was saying that one should get vaccinated, so people were attributing that circumstantial evidence to counter the fact that one should get vaccinated. So those kinds of controversy had happened. Sometimes you use that circumstance in which a person is to state, okay, why wouldn't somebody say, some faculty child is in the class, so you will get a good, even that child is working hard and honestly scoring. So people, just because that person happens to be the faculty's son or daughter, so you start attributing that the circumstances to belittle that person's personal achievement. So I'm just citing random examples here and there where you can relate to it, right? Any confusion anywhere, please try and intervene, unmute yourself and feel free to intervene. All right, shall we proceed? There was
Yes, ma'am.
one more. Yeah, there was one more that we covered. That was tu quoque fallacy. Again, tu quoque is a Latin word which means you too, right? And this happens when there is an inconsistency between the person who is arguing, making a claim, and the person's action. So if a person who is drunk, who comes and says you should not drink, then obviously you will have a lot of apprehensions about what he's advising or what he's saying, isn't it? So similarly, we had discussed a number of examples of your day-to-day personal examples of when your your dad wants to advise you not to talk while driving, not to talk on phone, but then you conclude that it's okay to talk on phone while driving because your dad does that. So if there's an inconsistency between action and the claims that is being made, or the advice, or whatever conclusion a person is making, then you will not accept that. So you will accept your conclusion will be the other way around, right? So we also discussed a little bit about how Trump's tu quoque fallacy was on the peak, the discussion when the election was on in USA last year. Yes, the another informal fallacy, we call it as appeal to authority fallacy. Now this fallacy, since it's a fallacy, that means the appeal, when we make an argument by referring to an authority, appeal to authority, then if there's a problem with the authority, then that's a fallacy. So sometimes when the authority appealed is not the right authority, right? So if somebody says, Subui ma'am, somebody says that, okay, tomorrow is a holiday because Subui ma'am has said it will be a holiday tomorrow, okay? But then Subui ma'am is not the authority to declare a holiday in the university, right? So either you Subui ma'am might have referred to the list of holidays, but I cannot go off the listed holidays because I'm not the right authority. So if somebody says this, that or somebody asks me to declare a holiday tomorrow, then I'm not the right authority on this. So when you make an argument based on the fact that you're trying to refer to the authority which is not the real authority, then that makes the argument weak, and that kind of a fallacy is called appeal to authority. This is the statement which reflects this fallacy. As you can make out, this is about a person called Angus Mackay, who is a whiskey blender for McDonald's distillery for 30 years. He has called for alcohol education to be introduced for children as young as 5, right? So the person who is trying to make a claim, he is referring to his call for introduction of alcohol for children, and he is referring to Mackay as the authority. So we can reconstruct this paragraph into premises and conclusion like this. The first explicit premise is that Mr. Mackay says that alcohol education should be introduced for 5-year-olds. So that's the first reason, the first premise. Then the second premise, so the claim here is that the claim here is that the alcohol education should be introduced for 5-year-olds. So if you read the entire paragraph, you can understand that the conclusion that is being drawn by putting up this the conclusion that is being emphasized in this argument is that alcohol education should be introduced for school children for 5 and above, right? And the arguments that are being given here is that they're referring to some authority, Mr. Mackay, who is saying that alcohol education should be introduced, and Mr. Mackay has 30 years of experience as whiskey blender, right? Now, why is it a fallacy? Any one of you can come in. You can look at P3. Third premise, this is an implicit assumption that you're assuming that since Mr. Mackay has an experience of 30 years as whiskey blender, he is an expert on alcohol education, and he's an expert in for school children. So this is a kind of a misplaced authority that one is trying to attribute, and that is why it's a fallacy. So he may have experience of 30 years in the distillery business, but he has absolutely no expertise on school education or alcohol education in school, and that is why referring to him as the authority is a wrong approach, and that is why there's a defect. So we call it as an appeal to authority fallacy. Is it okay? Can you make out now?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Good. So let's proceed. So this is on the lighter side. So Dr. Pepper, according to the doctor, I need less sodium in my diet. So referring to Dr. Pepper here. So this is on the lighter side. But otherwise also, like, we often cite just to justify our actions or our decisions. We sometimes appeal to a doctor which suits our interests, or an authority who suits authority which suits our interests. So in that case, we commit a fallacy. We are not going to break for quiz because I have done away with the quiz, as I said. So let's start with the discussion on the rest of the fallacies. So can you see the screen? So it's a quick comparison between informal and formal fallacies.
Yes, ma'am.
So here in informal fallacies, like, you focus on the content, although the structure may be right, but then the content may not be right. So like, for example, hydrogen is dry, so water is dry. Obviously, water is not dry. But then, you can make a logical, inference which may not be sound. Similarly, in formal fallacies, like, you have a defined structure. But then sometimes, the one which is encircled, every part of the wall is white. So the whole wall is white. So, is it a fallacy? Do you find any problem here? Any one of you? the statement is every part of the wall is white, so the whole wall is white. Does it look like fallacious?
No, ma'am.
Okay, good. We'll have a look at it. So the next fallacy on the list is the fallacy of composition and division. No, it's again an informal fallacy. This fallacy, occurs when we are invalidly referring the quality of the whole from the quality of the parts, right? So composition means, you're taking a part, you're picking up the quality of a part, and then you're making an inference for the quality of the whole. So that's an exaggeration. That's an extrapolation, which may or may not be true, right? And the example we just saw, hydrogen and oxygen are dry, so water is dry. Obviously, water is not dry. My organs are not conscious, so I'm not conscious. I'm conscious most of the time. Every player on the team is great, so the team is great. May or may not be true. So what I'm trying to suggest is that we cannot, blindly infer the quality of the whole from based on the quality of the parts. And when people do that, they fall prey to this kind of a fallacy. So some of the probing example is, every brick in the wall is red, so the wall is red. Is it fallacious? It may or may not be fallacious.
Yes,
Right
ma'am.
or wrong?
Yes, ma'am, you are right.
See, in the previous example, every part of the wall is white, so the whole wall is white. Now, this happens to be a valid argument because you're talking about every part of the wall, right? So then it is safe to assume, it is right to assume that yes, the whole wall is white. But here, when you're saying every brick in the wall is red, so the wall is red, it's not specified it's not specified that the whole wall is made of brick only. The wall may be made of something else as well, some stone or some other material. So we cannot, very confidently conclude here. So here this argument may or may not be fallacious. If it is actually consisting of only bricks, then in that situation it's okay. If every brick in the wall is red, then the wall is red. If the wall is made of only bricks, right? So sometimes, one has to be very careful in using, this composition approach to argument, because we can be wrong at otherwise. Then similarly, if you're using the quality of the parts to infer generalize the quality of the whole, then you call it as the fallacy of composition. And if it is the other way around, so you're assuming what is true of the whole is true for the parts, again, that is also a fallacy. So, the batch of 2021 is smart, and then we say that each and every one of you is smart. There will be a difference. So or the car is blue, therefore its engine is blue. So you cannot blindly deduce from the whole the qualities for its parts, right? So this is also a fallacy. Then we have what we call it as perfectionist fallacy. This is a fallacy that I have been personally very prone to. So the idea that a perfect solution exists and you keep working and keep searching before you take action. So sometimes that kind of that kind of an approach, or that kind of an thinking approach is a faulty approach, right? So like for example, this is on the lighter side. Somebody asks to pass salt, and then somebody is trying to devise a kind of a system to pass on the condiments. So this is a joke. So this perfectionist fallacy occurs when you reject an idea or a proposal purely on the ground that it is very difficult to solve. right? So often we think that, okay, we expect too much from the idea or the proposal, and that is why that spontaneity to action sometimes gets delayed, and you miss the bus and you lose an opportunity. So one has to be
Yes,
very
ma'am.
very you know very careful in falling prey to this kind of a fallacy. uh, I've given you an example here. Anyone of you can read it aloud?
World leaders should give up their plans to spend billions of dollars on rescuing financial markets. It would take trillions of dollars to fix this mess. The amount they are talking about will only partially solve the serious problem we face.
Mhm. So what is the claim being made here? What is the conclusion of this argument?
The world leaders should give up their plans to spend billions of dollars on rescuing the financial markets.
Yes, so that the claim is the first statement, right? So just because we should reject the world leaders' proposal to rescue financial markets, we've had a financial meltdown in the past few years, and there had been billions and trillions of bailout packages, but then a lot of people were against it. They said, like, this will not work. So where the understanding that if a proposed solution will not completely solve the problem, it should not be done, and therefore it is rejected. This kind of an argument is a faulty argument. So if the bank is failing, so if you say, okay, if I give the bank, this is not going to fix the problem completely. Of course, it is not going to fix the problem completely, but you cannot let the bank die, because it has consequences for a lot of small savers and the account holders. So what I'm trying to sometimes there cannot be a perfect solution to a problem, but when you reject a good enough solution in search of a perfect solution, you miss out on this opportunity of fixing that problem to a great extent. So one should be a bit careful about having such kind of a thought process or arguments being made. Now, the next is the fallacy of weak analogy. As you can make out from the figure, what is there in the figure? Anyone of you can understand the figure which is there on the screen?
Uncompatible parts brought.
What is being sewn together? You've
Ma'am, different fruits are
stitched
so together.
apple and
Non-compatible parts.
orange. Apple and
Green
orange.
apple and orange.
So often you come up, you hear this phrase when there's a wrong comparison being made. Don't compare apple with the oranges, isn't it?
Yes,
Isn't
ma'am.
it? Isn't that a way? So when you try and make that weak analogy to defend an argument, to defend a claim, then we say it's a fallacy of weak analogy. So if either the comparison that you're making is either too weak to sustain the argument, or the analogy itself has not been argued for. So you're trying to make an analogy, but then it's not the analogy or the comparison that is being argued for. So it can be problems. There can be problems in both. You are arguing for an analogy which is not being claimed, or you're making a weak analogy. Let's take an example. Anyone of you can read this aloud?
I don't see what all the fuss is about guns. Of course, gun ownership shouldn't be prohibited. You can kill someone with a hockey stick, but no one proposes to ban ownership of hockey sticks.
Okay. So what is the conclusion here? So what is
Gun
the
ownership shouldn't be prohibited.
yes? So basically, whosoever is giving this argument is trying to defend the fact that gun ownership shouldn't be prohibited, right? And what is the logic being given here? He's making a comparison between gun and hockey stick, isn't it? So he says that you can kill a person from a hockey stick as well, but nobody proposes to ban ownership of hockey sticks. But then, hockey stick and gun, gun kills instantly. Hockey stick may or may not kill, or very rarely kills, until unless you hit on a very sensitive part of the brain or head. But still, that analogy is being given to make a claim or to make a conclusion. So we can reconstruct this as the conclusion is we should not ban ownership of guns, because guns and hockey sticks, in that both can be used to kill people. And since when the implicit assumption is that when an object X is similar to an object Y in one respect, it is similar in all respects. So we should not ban ownership of hockey sticks. So, there's a kind of a double assumption here. First of all, there's a wrong analogy given here, and then secondly, we are assuming that they are similar to each other in all respects, right? And we are making that plea of not banning ownership of guns because we don't claim to ban the ownership of hockey sticks. So this kind of a weak analogy or an analogy being given a weak analogy being given to make a claim is known as fallacy of weak analogy, right? This is a perfectionist fallacy. And this is on the lighter side, so you can have a look.
Ma'am, I have a question.
Yes, please go ahead.
If we talk about the type of argument, what type of argument it is?
Type of argument. What kind of, what do you mean by type of argument?
It's a valid or invalid argument.
Sorry?
It's a valid or invalid argument.
See, structurally, it may be a valid argument because we are now looking at, content defects in the arguments. All right. So if you go by if PQ or if AB or then B A and then B, in that way, it's a valid argument. But here the problem is with the content. The content says that, it's not very forceful because you're giving a very weak analogy here. You understand? So based on your one case example of hockey stick, being used to, which might have killed somebody, the probability of hockey stick killing somebody is much lesser compared to the probability of what, gun killing somebody. And yet you are trying to make a comparison. So here the problems in all informal fallacies, the problem is with the content, the wrong assumptions, right?
So it's not an argument.
So apparently it may seem to be a valid, but structurally it may seem to be a valid, but otherwise it's not a sound argument or it's not a cogent argument. Okay.
So it's not at all an argument or invalid argument.
It is an argument. Every fallacy is an argument because they will have premises, they will have a claim.
So basically it's an invalid argument.
Yes, it's a weak argument. There's a defect in this argument from content perspective. And
So
what
it's
is that
not an
content?
invalid argument. It's a weak argument, not an invalid.
The valid and invalid argument. Yesterday we had discussed. Were you there yesterday?
No, ma'am.
You were not there. So a valid argument can be sound or unsound. Valid means, there's a logical connect. So logically, if you look at the example of cat and animal, so logically it sounds okay, but apparently visually you can see, say for example, yesterday we looked at the example of a dog. So all animals are four-legged, I have 4 legs, so I'm an animal. Or all cats have 4 legs. I have 4 legs, so I'm a cat. A dog is saying that. So that was the picture that I had started with. So there's a defect. Though. Logically, it's valid, but it is not sound, because that the animal, every four-legged animal is not a cat, right? So there's a problem in the content of the premise, right? So when there's a problem in the content of the premise, it's a informal fallacy. So defect, a problem, or a mistake in an argument is called a fallacy, right? So a valid argument can be fallacious. So, because it may not be sound, it may not be cogent, it may not be forceful. All right. Shall we proceed? Okay, so conflation of morality with legality fallacy. Again, some problem with Muhammad Saad. So sometimes what when we have that problem in our assumption that anything legal must be moral or anything illegal must be immoral, that also makes an argument weak or defective, right? Let's take an example. This is the statement. Anyone of you can read it aloud?
It's not as if it's immortal behavior to dress
It's not
provocatively.
immortal, it's immoral. Immoral.
Oh, sorry. It's not as if it's immoral behavior to dress provocatively and swear in front of an audience of preteens. After all, it's not illegal.
Yes. So what is the claim being made here? The conclusion. So here there is a
First
kind
point.
of a dilemma between morality and legality. And that is why we say there's a conflation of morality and legality fallacy here. Here the claim being made is that dressing provocatively and swearing in front of audiences of preteens is not immoral. And to claim that, to defend that claim, it is you're using the legal legal way. So the person is saying that it is not illegal to do this. So if it is not illegal, that means anything legal is moral. That is the assumption here, right? And on that pretext, you're trying to make a claim here, right? So when you try and confuse morality with legality, then that makes the argument weak or defective. Is it okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and then now we move on to, yes, now there's another one, causal fallacies. Causal fallacies are committed when we have a wrong linkages between the cause of something. We make wrong inferences. We already have the examples in front of us. If a black cat crosses your way, oh, ye to ashubh ho gaya. Somebody's if you're moving out and somebody sneezes, oh, ye to ashubh ho. Those kinds of assumptions. So sneezing is linked to something. Ashubh. Or maybe crossing of a black cat. So these are faulty thinking or fallacies. So there can be various ways of such kind of a causal fallacy, cause and effect linkages. Broadly speaking, there are 3 subtypes of causal fallacies. The first one is the post hoc ergo propter hoc fallacy. We will just see what it means. Fallacy of mistaking correlation for cause. since both of them occur together, so we say that it causes one another, then there's an inversion of cause and effect. So just because A causes B, then we assume that B will also cause A. So these kinds of fallacies related to cause and effect relationship, that should also be should also be looked into. Say, for example, the first causal fallacy, post hoc ergo propter hoc. As I said, Latin, there we will find a lot of Latin words in fallacies, because a lot of old philosophers and thinkers have given these fallacies, highlighted these fallacies. So this post hoc ergo propter hoc means after that this, therefore this because of that. So we wrongly infer that since an event A caused an event B merely on the basis that B occurred after. I've used the alphabets XY. So here on the screen, as you can see, event X caused an event Y merely on the basis that Y occurred after X. So since a Y occurred after X, an event Y occurred after X, we wrongly inferred. So our assumption that if somebody in olden days, something might have happened when a black cat might have crossed with somebody. So based on some small case observation, what we have done is we have made an inductive kind of a conclusion, and we have been citing that reason. These kinds of what we call these as these thinking, what we call it as I'm not able to recall that term. क्या कहते हैं इसको, इस तरह की जो superstitions, yeah, sorry, it was in my mind and I couldn't recall. Yes, so these kinds of superstitions are based on these faulty inferences which might have had happened for rare situation, right? So it's not that these are very popular superstitions, but sometimes we become superstitious, and we try and commit this kind of a fallacy. Just because an event happened after a particular another event, we say that this event caused that. So say for example, if somebody got a newly married couple, if any of the couple dies, the spouse is being blamed. ये शादी करके आई है और इसके वजह से इसका पति मर गया. I'm just giving you these broad biases and these superstitions, and so that's because we mistakenly connect the occurrence of two events as cause and effect relationship. So on the lighter side, I've got fever because of the hamburger I ate last night. May or may not be true. Okay, another example here is the fallacy of mistaking correlation for cause. So that was est hoc proper. If Y occurred after X, we presume that, we wrongly presume that X is the cause of Y. That was the first causal fallacy. The second fallacy is fallacy of mistaking correlation for cause. Anyone of you can read this aloud? Any
You
female,
only have-
any female can pitch in? Girl, any amongst the girls who are present?
Ma'am, may I?
Yeah, please.
You only have to look at the statistics to see the poverty is to see that poverty is the obvious cause of educational underachievement. 80% of those who leave school with no qualifications come from homes where income is at least 50% below the national average.
Mhm. So what is the claim being made here? What is the conclusion? Anyone of you?
80% of those who live.
So the claim is that poverty causes educational underachievement, isn't it? The first statement, you have to look at statistics to see that poverty is the obvious cause of educational underachievement, isn't it? This is the claim that is being made. So we say that, okay, the claim here is, the conclusion is that poverty causes educational underachievement. If you don't have money, you can't be properly educated. All right. And then what is the premise given here? The premise is that there is a statistical correlation between poverty and educational underachievement. Now, since, there has been, since you found that there is a correlation, that doesn't mean that it causes underachievement, isn't it? They're correlated, but then they need not necessarily be the cause. There might be a lot of other causes as well. All right. So this kind of mistake in argument, when we wrongly infer correlation for causality, that kind of a defect is known as the causal fallacy of correlation for cause. Is it clear to all of you? There's one more causal fallacy. Okay, so this is a, probably this will help you understand better. On the lighter side, correlation is not equal to causation. So here the causation is being established between the length of the mustache and sales here. So clearly there's a lot of room for growth. So if you the bigger your mustache, the greater will be your sales achievement. So it's just on the lighter side, but then often this kind of a mistake is committed, that yes, there is a wrong linkage being established, causal linkage between correlation and causation. The third causal fallacy is the fallacy of inversion or of cause and effect. So this is committed when one wrongly infers that X causes Y, so an absence of X will prevent Y. So since X causes Y, if absence of X will prevent Y, so that again is also faulty. Anyone of you can read this aloud?
Research carried out by the team of researchers shows that vitamin E may be the key to the secret of everlasting youth. The team believed that the vitamin may be at work normally in humans to prevent aging. Experiments carried out on the laboratory rats have enabled the scientists to discover that animals deprived of vitamin E seems to age faster and even become senile.
Mm-hmm. So there's a kind of a causality between vitamin E and aging process, isn't it? So the claim here being made is that vitamin E causes the aging process to slow, right? So and what is the logic being given here? Vitamin E deprivation causes hastened aging. So if that means if E does not, if lack of something causes a phenomena, so the presence of it will cause the opposite, of Y. So since vitamin E deprivation causes faster aging, so vitamin E will cause the aging process to slow down. That's not a right conclusion, because aging process can be slowed down not just because of the presence of vitamin E. There could be logical fallacy has been committed, right? A causal fallacy has been committed. Okay, so statistics, this is what Mark Twain has said. So then we have epistemic fallacies. We have still not started with the arguments techniques. Okay, so I'll be quick now. Epistemic means knowledge. This is a Greek term, epistem. So this happens when we use the language very or the knowledge and the knowledge of when we use the knowledge or the language in a very tricky manner. So when we use the language in a tricky manner, we call it as epistemic fallacy. And then we use, we appeal to ignorance. When we use the knowledge part, we call it as the appeal to ignorance. So there are two types of epistemic fallacies. This epistemic fallacy is like, it depends. It actually emerges from the problem of discerning from third person point of view what someone believes or knows. So if you want to know if somebody would have wanted to understand this animal from each one of these person, that this is a very famous example, 7 blind men and the elephant, so all of them, they discerned one part of the animal. So until unless if you look at from small partial perspective, or one part of it, or somebody what third person understands or believes, then you commit this kind of a fallacy. Like, for example, in this argument, Chris believes that US president enjoys basketball. Barack Obama is the US president, so Chris believes that Barack Obama likes basketball. So you're trying to discern what a person likes or believes based on some third party beliefs or understanding or knowledge, right? So when that knowledge is being used here, from a third party perspective, not based on facts or some truth, then you commit a fallacy, right? So this is how you can reconstruct the argument, and it's not very difficult to understand. So I'll move ahead. Appeal to ignorance again is an epistemic fallacy, and this is committed because a claim has not been proven. When we conclude that a claim which has not been proven, it must be false. Yeah, so this is a very common, very, very important fallacy. Please pay attention. This fallacy occurs because a claim has not been proven, it must be false, or that because it has not been disproved, it must be true. So, so there are two forms, positive form and the negative form. So it is often used in defending a belief system, or the astrology or the existence of a deity, right? So premises that no one has proved X is true, so X is false. This is what is the crux of this, this fallacy is. Let's take an example here. As no one has proved that UFOs exist, it's reasonable to assume that they don't. And then the other part is, no one has managed to prove that UFO don't exist, so we cannot reasonably conclude that they do. So reconstructing, you can see we can do in both ways. This is the negative one, this is the positive one. So no one has proved that UFOs exist, so UFOs do not exist. No one has proved that UFOs don't exist, so UFOs exist. So you sort of use this premise, whether no one has proved that it is true, you conclude that it is false. So that was all about the broad defects in the content of the argument, right? We will also now look at the faulty techniques. Right, so there are sometimes the structure of the argument may be okay, the argument may be valid. Sometimes the content may seem okay, but there is a problem. But then the argument may be weak or may not be good or strong because a weak technique, a faulty technique has been adopted. So we will try and look at what are those fallacies which are committed while arguing based on faulty techniques, right? So this faulty argument technique, they use poor techniques, and these are very, very common techniques. Often, when you switch on the TV, you will find one of these techniques being used to make an argument poor, and people don't even understand, right? So equivocation, red herring, slippery slope, straw man, begging the question, false dilemmas. Like, I don't know if any one of you have, heard of these, words or these phrases, but then these are very common kinds of, fallacies, wherein, technically the argument may seem to be valid, and the content may also may not be very obvious that there is any fault in the content, but the technique used is wrong. Like, for example, in case of equivocation, in equivocation, what happens is that you deliberately use a word or a form of words with the intention to confuse the audience. So this is on the lighter side. The cartoon here is, all trees have barks, every dog barks, so therefore every dog is a tree. So but then sometimes we use equivocation very wisely to deflect the audience, right? A very common kind of a technique. So you make use of the language episteme here, and here the content is also okay, but then the meaning changes. The meaning changes completely. Sorry. So this is a very, very hilarious example that I've taken here. In the management department, someone broke one of the chair's legs. Therefore, one of the management department professors has a broken leg. So chair is used for the professor, chair. These are the standard jargons. But here, although we are referring to the physical chair, we can even think about the real professor who is heading as or chairing a particular committee or a department or whatever. So chair, the word, the conflating word, the confusing word here is the chair, right? Then the second faulty technique is red herring. Now, red herring, any one of you have heard about red herring? Any one of you? Red herring?
Maybe it's a law term.
It's a what? Sorry?
Term used in law.
Law. Okay. Anybody from finance side or from commerce?
Yes, ma'am.
Have you ever heard about red herring prospectus?
Yes, ma'am. I have.
IPOs?
Yes, ma'am. I have
Mhm.
red herring prospectus. Yes.
Mhm.
It's
Red-
basic.
Red herring is actually a fish, a very strong smelling fish, right? Which is often used, to mislead or distract dogs, when they are on a trail to attack its victim. So it's basically a distraction technique. So it is used here as a distraction technique. So when we say this red herring technique is used in order to distract from a certain conclusion. So an irrelevant premise is given as the reason for accepting the conclusion being advanced. Say for example here, the child is asking for a toy, and mom is trying to uh, distract her by referring to the treat that she has prepared at home. So the mother is trying to divert the kid's attention. So sometimes in an argument or in a debate, people try and give irrelevant reasons or premises to deflect from the conclusion being advanced. So a very common example, like I've cited here, of the example of the ruling by a judge. So the judge should rule against the charge of false accounting or against the chief executive of Utili Corp. CEO is very popular with shareholders and presides over an extremely healthy company. So what is what is the conclusion here in this argument? So the situation here is that there is the CEO of a company who has committed some false accounting, who has been convicted of some false accounting charges, and the conclusion or the claim being made that the judge should rule against the charge of the false accounting. But then the premises is the premise given is very flimsy. So the conclusion is that the court should rule against the charge of false. The CEO should not be convicted, right? So should rule against the charge of false accounting because the CEO is very popular. So they are not saying that CEO has not committed or any evidence of not committing that charge of false accounting is not being presented, but a deflecting a deflecting reason is being given. CEO is very popular with shareholders and presides over an extremely healthy company. Does this remind you of any example?
Ma'am, there was a case of a serial killer, Ted Bundy. So people used to defend him, saying that he's too good looking and qualified to be a serial killer. So he shouldn't be punished.
Yes. So giving flimsy reasons or deflecting reasons and not reasons against a particular charge that is being made. Okay. So if the economy is not doing good, then we attribute, at least we have a very strong leader. So that's also a kind of a deflecting statement, right? Then these are some of the examples. Did your foundation accept money from foreign entities? That support terror organization. If somebody's asking, oh, my foundation has done a lot of good things for the world. So it's not refuting that I've not received. You can see my account, but it is giving other, arguments, conflating arguments or deflecting arguments to prove the point, which is a fallacious argument. Then another very common technique used is slippery slope fallacy. This is again a very dangerous fallacy, which is very, very liberally used by people to propagate false claims and false conclusions. Now, this technique is employed when an arguer wrongly assumes that to permit or forbid a course of action will inevitably lead to occurrence of further related and undesirable events, without providing good reasons to suppose that the further events will indeed inevitably follow. Slippery slope fallacy. This is a very, very common fallacy. Any example comes to your mind?
Political discourse, ma'am, if you don't want to look for someone A, and there is a chain of events will happen, and then there will come something like that.
Yes, in political discourse, it has been used. It has been used and abused to paint a picture about some group of people or some community, and then you're trying to trigger those reactions that this will cause and this will happen, and try and paint a kind of a or for that matter, whenever any penal sentences or harsh laws are being being instated, then you have these kinds of arguments being made. So, for example, this is a very generic, a very different example, but you can make out yourself how and relate to related circumstances. This state argument is about decriminalizing cannabis. Cannabis is what? Anyone of you know what cannabis is?
Yes, ma'am, it's a plant.
It's a weed, isn't it? Cannabis is a weed which is so क्या कहते हैं हिंदी में कुछ I'm not able to recall that name. So the argument is that decriminalization of cannabis would be just the start. It would lead to a downward spiral into widespread abuse of harder drugs like heroin and cocaine, isn't it? So the cannabis has been found to have a lot of medicinal use as well, right? So decriminalizing people, the argument here is that we should not decriminalize cannabis because this is again, it's a kind of a drug, and it's maybe a mild drug, but then if we decriminalize, then use of hard drugs would increase. So anything that leads to increased use of harder drugs should be avoided. So that's the implicit assumption, and then based on that we try to object to it. So so we imagine something which doesn't have any example. Recently there had been a lot of hysteria about Taliban, so Taliban will come and do this and do that. So you try and paint a picture, and based on some specific events which is happening in their country, we try and project it, project this as a future. If we don't do this, if we don't do that, so whether you do this or you don't do that, it can be applied in both cases. So here it is that it should not be decriminalized because this will happen. And similarly, like in other situations, like you can use this kind of a slippery slope. So this is this here in this picture you have a a hilarious example of how we use slippery slope argument to prove a point that we want to make, which may not have much of an evidence, isn't it? So never sing in the shower, singing leads to dancing, dancing leads to sleeping, and sleeping leads to paramedics in your naked. So that's how you keep connecting events and then projecting a future. Then another very common technique, fallacious technique, is straw man fallacy. Now here the arguer ignores the opponent's real position on an issue and sets up a weaker version of that position by misrepresenting or exaggerating or distorting or simplifying. So when you're distorting or misrepresenting somebody's argument in order to make it easier to defeat. So straw is a weak structure already. We all know what straw man is. So you try and make an argument by ignoring the real position, and you try you present a weaker version of that position by misrepresenting and exaggerating, so that you can dismantle that argument. So, for example, here you can see the principal is saying the school lunch budget must be examined to cut out waste. That's what the principal is trying to suggest. And here look at what the critic is saying. The critic is saying this guy wants to starve our children. So what you're trying to do is that you're trying to you're trying to distort the actual position and substitute with a distorted and misrepresented version of that position in order to dismantle that argument, right? So that's what we call it as straw man argument. So usually in the TV debates you will find, or in political discourse you'll find the straw man argument happening a lot, isn't it? So I remember it happened, there was a debate on capital punishment, it being extended to some terrorist, and then or for that matter, so people will attribute, okay, you are so the person was trying to argue whether capital punishment is good or not, but just because he was arguing when a terrorist had been accused, had been given a capital punishment, so he was he was accused of being pro-terrorist himself. So that's how people do. You try and weaken the person's actual position by misrepresenting what person is trying to say. All right. Then we have there may be a lot of other. This example you can have a look at it. This is about how doctors' position has been used to weaken the decision on euthanasia. So you can have a look at it later. There are two more faulty techniques. One is begging the question. Now, this again is a very interesting technique, begging the question, or what we call it as circular reasoning. When the truth of the conclusion is assumed in the premise itself. Let me give you an example. So we also call it as an circular argument technique. What is the key to success? Hire the right employees. How do you know you hired the right employees, right ones? Because the business is successful. So, so there's a circular reasoning here. So you're talking about success. You say, right, you hire right employees. How do you know you hired right employees? Because the business is successful. So there's the premise has the assumption. The premise has the assumption for the conclusion. Again, this is a lengthy argument when it's a situation. It's a kind of story of three thieves who pulls off a successful venture, and then they steal 4 diamonds. They decide to divide the haul. Eventually, the first thief says, the first thief says that I'll get 2 diamonds and you 2 get 1 each, right? So there are 3 thieves and 4 diamonds. And he said that I should get 2 diamonds because I'm the leader. So the second thief says, wait a minute, who says you're the leader? I must be the leader because I'm getting the largest share of the haul. So that you see the argument is circular in nature. So that such a kind of circular argument defect is known as the begging the question argument, right? So finally, we have this last argument called false dilemma. Now, false dilemma, again, here the arguer paints a picture that there are only 2 options, when in fact there are 4. The arguer sets up the dilemma whether none really exists. So we often find this in political debates and political contexts, and in a lot of situations, like for example, we say that we can do this or that, and then the argument poses a kind of a situation that only this, either we can do this or that, although there might be other options as well. Like for example, here in this argument, it says there's a tough choice facing the government and the nation. Either we cut taxes and increase everyone's spending power, thereby providing much needed stimulation to the economy, or we increase spending on health and education. It is impossible to do both, and without a tax cut, the economy will remain weak. So increased spending on health and education will have to be. So basically, they're saying that we should not increase public spending on health and education because we have to we have to stimulate the economy, and that can happen by cutting taxes. But if we cut taxes, we can't increase public spending on health and education, right?
So they say that either we cut taxes or we increase public spending on health and education. So this is not the only solution. So we can cut taxes as well as we can increase spending on health and education. We can reduce spending on other portfolios. No, we can reduce spending on defense. We can reduce spending on infrastructure. We can other other areas on so. But then the argument
is presented in such a manner that the audience is given only two choices. So there's a kind of a false dilemma that is being projected. Right? Say, for example, sometimes like in the election, either you have this or either you choose this person or or you don't love the country, or you don't want good for the country, or you don't want good for your constituency. So this is how it is projected, right? So a false dilemma is being projected in order to confuse the audience. So this now here what happens is, in these kinds of weak argument techniques, these fallacies, the arguments seems valid, the structure is valid, the content there's also nothing wrong in the content as such, but then the technique that is being used, that is problematic here, right? And that doesn't paint a true picture, and that is why we say there's a defect in the argument. So roughly we've covered almost all. As I said, I have decided not to go for quiz today because you already have a kind of a test lined up for Thursday. So most probably Dr. Faraz will conduct that quiz because I will not be. So it's not a quiz, it's actually going to be a sessional test. And please make yourself available for the sessional tests because this has been pre-announced, and most probably all these tests that are being happening by announcing in advance, they are going to be compulsory. So if there had been any contingencies or any emergency at your end, you will have to approach the teacher separately. So we will take the average of these tests, right? So with this, we sort of finish off with the discussion on the fallacies. So we'll have a quick recap before we part, right? So let me stop sharing the screen first. Is there anything that is not clear to any one of you?
Please provide this PPT on the WhatsApp group.
Sorry?
Could you please provide it on the WhatsApp group?
PPTs, yes, I'll share the PPTs. I'll share the sources also. So like roughly we have covered around 12 informal fallacies, right? 4 formal fallacies. And then we have also covered around, in the end, how many? Six faulty argument techniques: equivocation, red herring, slippery slope, straw man, begging the question is the circular argument, and false dilemma, right? So, I know at the outset it might seem a little confusing, especially because I have tried to hurriedly cover this. Usually I take around 3 double sessions for this. But then, since I may not be available for a couple of weeks after tomorrow, so I've tried to cover this part as, much as possible. So in case there's any problem by any one of you, if you want to approach me to clarify something, you can text me separately. I will be available. but I won't be there for the class as such. So I will be sharing the PPTs today itself, so that you can go through it and you can practice and you can, associate, the discussions around and the debates around, and you can relate to these kinds of fallacies. These are very interesting ways to assess the logic, the content, and the soundness of an argument being presented by people around us, be it our family or friends or people in the professional setting, or people at large at the community level or the national or international level. So you can relate how you can pick up the fallacies. Okay, this is what is being happening here, right? And it becomes very, sometimes people become very excited about it. So I hope you have gained something from today's session. And with this, I wish you all good luck. Hopefully, if I'm back, then I'll probably try and have a session in the end, perhaps before your exams. Otherwise, I wish you all good luck, happy critical thinking, and don't take this lightly. This is going to add to your basic skill of making good arguments, right? I hope that's it. Any comments, any clarification, any question from any one of you? So shall we close?
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.